For the first time this spring, we are going to project the opening day roster. All today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Monday, February 17th, 2025. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen. Every single day, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome in, everybody. Hope you all had a fantastic weekend. If you watched hockey on Saturday and are an American, you certainly had a pretty intriguing and honestly just a weekend that'll fire up. I don't really care which side of the border you live on. That was an electric sporting spectacle and a pretty incredible sporting event to watch. What a fun game to be able to sit down for. I don't want to hear about an NHL All-Star game ever again. That should just be the new standard. Here over on the baseball side of things, for the first time this spring, and I say spring, every year I say for the first time this spring, or like, let's talk about it, and I mention spring, and it's, February, and somebody has to go, it's not spring yet. Okay, thanks. Okay, I got it. For the first time this spring training, we are going to have our roster projection. I want to give credit to all of our beat writers who pretty much everybody in the baseball media circle does roster projections and does multiple roster projections. So if you think my opinion sucks or you want other opinions on what the roster could look like, go check out any of our beat writers. I'm sure they all have multiple at this point, honestly, roster projections already available to you. We're going to kick off ours today, though. If you're a new listener or are in the last 12 months new and weren't around for roster projections that we do on this show, well, every spring training, how I break these down is more of a tier list. Now I give you the 26-man roster I am predicting as of today. But it's more of a broken down by tiers. We have the locks, we have the close to locks, and we have likely, 50-50 toss-up, unlikely, and possible. Some of those aren't very long conversations. Honestly, for the first roster projection of the year we do, I almost want to talk about the players that I don't have projected to make the roster more than I do the players I have projected, because I think there's a lot of really close battles this year. On the quote-unquote locks section, I only have 15 players. That leaves double digits somewhat up for grabs of varying degrees. Now, I also have 3 or 4 close to locks that I'm fully expecting to make the roster, so that number then moves up to 18. But I think that there is a lot of it's fluid, and especially when you look, and we'll go position by position here as well. I think there's a couple of positions that really could kind of, I guess I'll say, throw a wrench in the neat and tidy 26-man roster that maybe some people are envisioning. So let's start off with the locks. This is where there's not too much conversation because we all kind of know that these guys. Now, I am taking literally a lock. There is no doubt it is a 100% chance. There's even a 99% chance they're not going to be on this list. This is fully guaranteed. There's nothing they can do in spring training to not be on the roster. At catcher, we have Jake Rogers. At first base, I have Colt Keith. Second base, Gleyber Torres. Third base, Matt Vierling. Outfield, Riley Green, Parker Meadows, and Kerry Carpenter. Starting pitcher, Tarek Skubal, Jack Flaherty, Reese Olson. Bullpen, Jason Foley, Tommy Canley, Bo Brisky, Will Vest, Tyler Holton. Now, admittedly, There's a couple of these that you could probably argue aren't 100%, but like I am the most confident in these 15 guys making the roster. I guess there's a world in which if Colt Keith is unplayably bad defensively at first base in spring training games, that maybe there's a conversation that but even then, like, I feel like they just find a different spot for him, or like he's going to be forced to just play there and we'll figure it out later. I think the really only way is if he is so bad defensively that they're like, okay, this dude, objectively, there's zero future with him playing this position. And Spencer Torkelson hits like 400, like those, and looks great defensively as well. Like that's like, and even then, I don't think it's a guarantee. I think that like just maybe starts the conversation a little bit more. Then when you look at bullpen, like I mean, Will Vest usually struggles out the gate, so like maybe there'll be some conversations, but I've kind of gotten over that. Like he always starts slow, and then when the regular season comes around is great. So like I'm just going to assume that's going to happen. Bo Brisky didn't make the team out of camp last year. Maybe there's a conversation surrounding that, but I think that's pretty safe to say as well. So that's kind of where I stand with the locks. Let's move on to the close to locks. Okay. At catcher, Dylan Dingler. Shortstop, Javi Baez. Utility, Andy Ibanez. Dylan Dingler and Jake Rogers, I fully expect to be the catching tandem coming out of camp and coming out of spring training. The only reason he's not an absolute lock is just because he hit so poorly last year that if maybe there's no signs of improvement early on, that there's a chance they go externally. But like you look at the Tigers 40-man roster, you look at the organizational depth at catcher, period. The plan pretty much like all eggs in this basket. Like the plan really is Dylan Dingler and Jake Rogers. There's not a whole lot I think that could happen to make that not the catching tandem, at least for the first couple of months of the season. Shortstop, Javi, kind of goes without saying. You're still just paying him and on the hook for so much money that I expect him to be on the opening day roster. And to be completely honest with you, I think there's a pretty decent chance he's the opening day starting shortstop still as well. And I know that makes people's skin crawl, and some people just don't really like what I'm saying. Well, like, unfortunately, that's where we are. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like that is in where I sit on February 17th. That's what I expect to happen. He hopefully is going to show a lot of improvement in spring training, and hopefully is going to show that the surgery was good for him and that maybe he can take a step back in the right direction. But we're just looking for anything like that. That's how low the bar is. Like we're not even asking for like being above average hitter or, win a gold glove. It's like give any sort of positive contribution. And the Tigers probably are just going to keep him on the roster and keep playing him. But that's a pretty big if. So I have him as a close to lock technically. Like if he's just awful in spring and goes 0 for 50 and the swing is broken, I guess maybe there's a conversation of like just count your losses, but I really don't think that's going to happen. And then Andy Ibanez, just like all of those kind of waiver claim, non-starting guys, it's hard for me to put any of them as sure locks, but among the utility players, I think Andy Ibanez has comfortably the easiest path to get on the roster. And I think AJ Hinch loves him. He can play multiple positions. He can play them pretty well. And he absolutely crushes left-handed pitching. All of those things together mean that I don't think there's too much that can happen in spring training to not have Andy Ibanez make the team. Let's talk about, this is where the conversation really gets kind of juicy. We'll talk about the likely candidates and then the toss-ups, because there is a handful of guys in the toss-ups I don't have making the team, obviously, and then some that I do. And I think there's some positional battles that are really going to be intriguing just in general the rest of spring. So we'll talk about all of that right after this. Got to talk to you all today about our friends over at Select Quote. In sports, having a winning strategy is everything, and it's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Olympics. The same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from Select Quote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. Select Quote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets SelectQuote apart is, rather, their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offer one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. If you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage of up to $5 million. No medical exam required, and it's more affordable than you'd think. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. So get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/lockedon. Go to selectquote.com/lockedon today to get started at selectquote.com/lockedon. SelectQuote, they shop, you save. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2, Locked On Tigers. Appreciate you all for tuning in, as always, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back tomorrow as we talk about the goings of camp. Obviously, not talking too much about storylines from the weekend today because we're doing our first roster projection, but tomorrow we'll catch you up with all the news and notes from camp, obviously, on Monday and throughout the weekend. And we'll start our player preview series this week at some point as well when we have time to do so. Just start talking about what we need to see from players, what we project out of players in the 2025 season. Today, though, like I said, roster projections. We are on to the likely category or tier, I guess we can call it. I only have one player in this tier. This is like 75 to 85% chance of making it, right? The only person I have is John Brebbia, newly signed reliever for the Detroit Tigers. I think everybody else, and not like the exact same percentage, but everyone else is somewhat, in a positional battle where there's a conversation and a toss-up, or it's like, okay, that person's probably or almost certainly going to make the roster. Brebbia is the only guy that, to me, it's kind of like, yeah, like he's probably going to make it. I think that it's a likely outcome, but we've seen stranger things than somebody get signed and then I don't know if he's completely terrible for some reason, maybe not, but I think it's pretty likely that he finds himself on the opening day roster. The toss-up category. This is always the most intriguing of all of them. So I have at shortstop, Trey Sweeney, third base, Jace Young, utility, we have Winfield Perez, Zach McKinstry, Spencer Torkelson, and Justin Henry Malloy. Starting pitcher is Jackson Jobe, Casey Mize, Kenta Maeda, and Cater Montero. Bullpen, Sean Gunther, Brennan Hanafy, and Brant Herter. Now, the players that I have making the roster from this group. Trey Sweeney as my 20th player to make the roster. Jace Young as my 21st. Justin Henry Malloy as my 22nd. Jackson Jobe and Casey Mize as number 23 and 24. And then Sean Gunther and Brant Herter as 25 and 26, taking the last two spots on the roster. So let's break this down. I want to start off with Trey Sweeney. He's a total toss-up. I have him projected to make the roster right now because of a kind of a situation, I guess we'll call it, between him and Zach McKinstry. But I could really see them going either way. And the reason why this is a toss-up to me and not a likely or probable scenario is because Trey Sweeney is young and Javi Baez is presumably going to be healthy. And Trey Sweeney has, I think, all three of his minor league options still available to him. Zach McKinstry has zero. Now, some people roll their eyes at that. I remember last year with Joey Wentz, I consistently talked about how he was going to make the opening day roster because he didn't have any options left. The Tigers weren't just going to DFA him without seeing if he could be a solid, pure reliever for this team. I think there's a chance that we're in a similar scenario here. Now, obviously, Zach McKinstry is not going to do anything wild that we don't expect him to do. Like, he is what he is. I think we're all pretty well aware of the caliber of player that he is. But I think the one thing that McKinstry is going for him is he can play all over the field. You're talking about outfield. You're talking about every infield position except first base. The versatility that he brings and the fact that he's a lefty bat, I think makes it, again, especially with no options left, makes him a valuable utility bench player. Now, the conversation with Trey Sweeney is you can make shortstop a pure platoon. It might be if you have McKinstry on the roster as well, which is why I think there is a legitimate chance that, especially if Trey Sweeney doesn't tear the cover off the ball, he's starting off just as the Toledo Mudhens starting shortstop at the beginning of the year. Now, that doesn't mean he won't play for the Tigers this year. He will, objectively, unless he has a season-ending injury. He will play for the Detroit Tigers at some point. But I think that all of those factors combined make it a really kind of a tough decision. The reason why not both of them is because you don't need two left-handed hitting shortstops and a right-handed hitting shortstop. They're not going to carry all three of Javi, Trey Sweeney, and Zach McKinstry. That's not going to happen. At least I would be stunned if at full health they chose to go that direction. That seems like a wild decision, just given the fact that Sweeney and McKinstry are both left-handed hitting. So that is kind of the situation you're in. Now, again, I have Sweeney making the team. I think with the versatility that you have elsewhere on the roster, with Andy Ibanez, we'll talk about Winfield Perez here in a second. Justin Henry Malloy will be a corner outfield option for you. Like, with the other players available to you, I don't think we need to prioritize Zach McKinstry being on the roster kind of above all else. But I am telling you right now, it would not shock me in the slightest if Trey Sweeney was just the starting shortstop for the Mudhens on opening day and Zach McKinstry got the 26th spot on this roster and they went that way. But this would be season 3 of McKinstry. We know what he is, and I think there would be more value in having Sweeney be a legitimate option against right-handed pitching at shortstop than there would Zach McKinstry's poor left-handed hitting versatility kind of all over the field when you have other players that can fill that gap anyway. So those are kind of all of my immediate thoughts on that battle. Jace Young at third base, I do have making the roster. He's my 21st player on the team. This one isn't too much of a conversation. I think there is a chance that he doesn't make it. I want that to be kind of abundantly clear. I think, the Torkelson situation is interesting. Between Winfield Perez, Spencer Torkelson, Zach McKinstry, Justin Henry Malloy, and I guess you can throw Trey Sweeney in there too. If only 2 of those guys make it, of that, 5 names I just listed, if only 2 of those guys make it, then Jace Young is kind of, or 3 of those guys make it rather, then Jace Young might be kind of pushed out. But I expect him to hit a lot better. One of the big things that has already been talked about rather in camp is how much better his swing looks and feels after his wrist surgery was successful and healed and whatnot. And it pretty much zapped all power out of his bat last year. He has crushed the ball at every level he's played at in really his entire life before last season and being a major leaguer. So I expect him to be able to make the transition. The biggest question I have with Jace Young is he going to be a serviceable defensive third baseman more so than offense? So we'll see, but those are 2 questions. A, is the offense going to bounce back? B, is the defense going to be good enough? And the fact that there's question marks on both sides of the ball means it is still a toss-up to me. But I think that if I had to place a bet right now, I would say that he makes the roster out of camp as well. Then you have the 3 guys that I don't have making the roster in the utility section: Winfield Perez, Zach McKinstry, Torkelson. We already talked about Z-Mac enough. Now he has no options left, like I said. So if he is to not make the roster, then he is put on waivers, and that makes him available to not be a part of this organization going into opening day. So that's why they might protect him. Torkelson, I have missing the roster. Winfield Perez, I have missing the roster. We'll start with Torkelson because I think that's a little bit more pigeonholed. He just doesn't have the versatility, right? It's really either first base or DH. And Colt Keith is not a platoon player. As we've mentioned a lot, he actually hit better, you could argue, against lefties last year than righties, and he's going to hit really well against righties in his career too. So I'm not sure there's too much of a platoon opportunity long-term at first base. Now, if he crushes left-handed pitching and is hitting home runs against lefties, then you could argue for the Kerry Carpenter, Spencer Torkelson platoon at DH a little bit. which I think there is a door open for that, especially with the Tigers not getting Bregman. I think there's a possibility that Torkelson is still on the team. And I think it could even be as much as a 50-50 toss-up or a 40-60 split. But from where I sit right now, I think it's probably more likely that he only has one option left. So if you do send him down, then next year he will be out of options. But I think as it stands right now, I am leaning more towards him starting off in Toledo and then utilizing that option. Winfield Perez, that conversation is tied with Justin Henry Malloy. We'll talk about that right after this. Got to talk to y'all today about our friends over at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want a fourth quarter comeback to happen, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting features because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3 late, I never feel like I miss my chance. Plus, the app is super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. It's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Third and final segment, Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in as always. So we're in our toss-up section here, our toss-up tier on players to make the roster. I have Winfield Perez missing the roster, Justin Henry Malloy making the roster. This one really is very, very close to me, and I could see it going either way. I could see this changing throughout spring training. The biggest thing for me that could affect this is if Winfield Perez proves that he can hit left-handed pitching more. If he hits against lefties, I think he flies up this likelihood. Like legitimately, Winfield Perez goes from not making the roster to, for my projection at least, to like being a close to a lock if he just proves that he can hit lefties better. And that's the reason I have Malloy ultimately. This is an outfield that has 3 premier lefty talents, right? You have Riley Green, who is hopefully going to be your best offensive player, your best non-pitcher on your team this year, is a lefty. You have Kerry Carpenter, who notoriously crushes right-handed pitching, is a lefty, does not get many opportunities against lefties. We'll talk about that this spring coming up here as well. And then Parker Meadows, who showed a lot of signs of life in the second half of the season, but is still also a lefty that does better against righties. So I think, especially with Matt Vierling now, you didn't get a third baseman, so he is going to have to play a lot of third base. Doesn't mean all of third base. You have Jace Young as well, but that's going to be probably somewhat of a platoon situation too. I think they will want their utility outfield option, corner outfield option, to be a righty that can hit lefties. And Justin Henry Malloy struggled mightily against right-handed pitching last year and crushed left-handed pitching, like almost a 900 OPS against left-handed pitching in the major leagues in his short stint in the majors, albeit last year. Now, Winfield Perez, far better defender in the outfield. Justin Henry Malloy was not a good defender. It was one tool, and that was hitting left-handed pitching, but he did that really well. So I think this really could go either way. Winfield Perez is a switch hitter that didn't hit left-handed pitching well. Like, and I'm not talking like, I'm talking like hit, what was it, 200, maybe even sub 200. It was somewhere around there. I think it was just over 200 and OPS in the 500s against left-handed pitching. So all he has to do is prove that he can hit lefties better, and I think that he's kind of the slam dunk obvious candidate here because of positional versatility and the fact that he's a switch hitter and puts together professional at-bats. But as it stands right now, the season started tomorrow, I think they'd go with a guy who's a little bit more proven against left-handed pitching, which I think is what they want a little bit more. As far as starting pitching goes, I have Jackson Jobe and Casey Mize getting the rotation spots with Kenta Maeda and Kader Montero not. Montero, he has options left, and he will pitch at some point for the Tigers this year. You could even see him out of the bullpen at some point, but I think they want to develop him as a starting pitcher. So I think he just starts off in Toledo, nothing against him at all. Maeda is the big question mark here. Casey Mize has, I think, 3 minor league options left, which sounds wild considering how little he's played at the major league level lately, but it's all injury based, and that doesn't burn an option. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, he has all 3 of his minor league options left. So you could put Kenta Maeda in there, Brant Herter in there, whoever, in that 5th spot in the rotation, and then have Mize just start off the season in Toledo. That's absolutely on the table, and that's why he's ultimately in the toss-up area. And then Jackson Jobe is kind of self-explanatory. Like, that's just because he's really young, and who knows what the Tigers are going to do with service manipulation and whatnot. But when it comes to Maeda, is really the biggest question mark here. Everyone's talking about Kenta Maeda and how he looks in camp, and if he actually did take some steps forward, that he's going to be the 5th man in the rotation, and the Tigers are still on the hook for like 10 to 12, 10 mil this year, 12 mil this season to pay to him. So like that's fair. And like, he is probably the biggest question mark among those 4 names I just mentioned. I don't have him making the team right now. And the only reason I say that is because I haven't seen him pitch this year. My most recent Kenta Maeda Detroit Tigers sample was not very good, to the point where even when the Tigers were bruised and battered and hurt and only had like 2 or 3 healthy starting pitchers down the stretch, he still was coming out of the bullpen. So like, I need to see it to believe it. And if I do see it and his stuff does look way better, and he, threw a lot over the winter and has completely reinvented himself in the Tigers coaching staff that's so great and has helped so many players over the last few years, has done their wonders on him, and he's, taking big steps and is great, then so be it. And we'll celebrate that, because that's a good problem to have, is starting pitching depth. And he'll be the 5 starter in this rotation, probably behind Jobe, or maybe even the 4 if he looks good enough. But I need to see it to believe it. I'm not just going to project that for no reason without having seen Kenta Maeda in spring yet. So we'll see what happens there, but absolutely a toss-up that could swing the other way. And then bullpen, the 3 guys here, I have 2 making the roster. I have Gunther and Herter making the team, with Brennan Hanafy missing out. I really, originally when I made this list, I had Hanafy and Gunther making it. That's a righty-lefty. Both of them can make it, but I think Herter's also a lefty, and I think if you went in with Gunther and Hanafy making it out of those 2, or out of those 3 rather, then you're talking about a bullpen that would only have 2 lefties in it. And I think that if you can choose between, like, all 3 of them were great last year, so great. And so I think if you're choosing between Hanafy and Herter, righty lefty, Herter gives you multiple innings of like starter caliber stuff. I'm not sure the Tigers are really like bent on guaranteeing that Herter is developed as a starter. You can kind of put him in the bullpen, gives you a multiple innings option, and gives you another lefty, so that you have 3 lefties out of the pen. I think that would go a long way, and I think that that's probably the safer assumption. But I expect Hanafy to compete for a roster spot as well. So that's 26 guys. Unlikely. I have utility. Ryan Kreidler only has 1 option left. This would be his last one. Starting pitcher, I have Sawyer Gibson-Long, Ty Madden, and Matt Manning. Matt Manning also down to only 1 option left. So if he's sent down to the minor leagues after spring training this year, he will have 0 options left going forward, which would be a fascinating conversation. Bullpen, Tyler Owens, Tyler Madison, and Chase Lee. Madison coming back from injury. The other 2 recently added to the 40-man roster, kind of expecting them to be depth pieces here early on. The only person in the impossible category among the entire 40-man roster is Alex Cobb, and that is just because of injury. One person I didn't have anywhere on here is Alex Lang. The reason for that is I don't know his injury status. It sounds like they might just play it safe and not push him to be ready by opening day. So once we learn more about him, we can throw him into the mix there as well. I want to end with the non-roster invitee players to watch. So the players that aren't on the 40-man roster that I think are interesting conversations to have. Brennan White, I've talked about a lot. Really like him. If the fastball is is back to where it was pre-injury and the slider still moves like it does, I think there might be a small, like 5% way outside chance that he makes a run the roster. Wilmer Flores, similar conversation. We talked about him last week. But the big one, okay, if I had to put all of my money on one player to not that is not on the 40-man roster to make the team out of camp, not saying it's likely, not saying it's going to happen. I think it's almost certainly not going to happen. But if I had to pick one player, it's Hao-Yu Lee. I love this kid. Obviously was the return for Michael Lorenzen 2 trade deadlines ago. He is getting reps at third base. He looks really good there on the, spring training backfield videos that we've gotten from our great beat writers. But he looks really solid there, and he's done nothing but hit. He increased his power production a lot more this past year. I think is a guarantee kind of to at worst be the opening day third baseman for the Toledo Mud Hens. And I think probably knocks on the door. And especially if there's some injuries or if third base is truly kind of a competition that's an open door for anybody to grab, I really do want to drive home like Hao-Yu Lee is good. And I think that he can really, it's like extra credit. Like he can only impress this year. I don't think there's much that he can do to make me not really like him as a prospect. So we'll see what happens with him. We'll see what his opportunities look like and how many opportunities he's going to get throughout spring training. But I hope they keep him at third base because I would really love that to work out for the Tigers. So I'll end you with just kind of running down my total 26-man roster again. That's Jake Rogers, Dylan Dingler, Colt Keith, Gleyber Torres, Javi Baez, Trey Sweeney, Matt Vierling, Jace Young, Riley Green, Parker Meadows, Kerry Carpenter, Justin Henry Malloy, Andy Ibanez, Tarek Skubal, Jack Flaherty, Reese Olson, Jackson Jobe, Casey Mize, Jason Foley, Tommy Canley, Bo Brisky, Will Vest, Tyler Holton, John Brebbia, Sean Gunther, and Brant Herter. Now, this will not be the roster. Okay. I am again, like we will do multiple of these. We will have a roster projection number 2 and maybe even a number 3 if a lot's happening in spring training and we get, to right before opening day when the decision comes out. But usually we do 2 or 3 in spring. So this will move, and there will be guys that I talked about as, unlikely or whatnot. I didn't have anybody in impossible for that reason. Like we haven't seen a game yet. We don't even know what these guys really look like. So I want to leave the door open for anybody to really kind of make a run at a roster spot. But I think that there's some healthy competition here. There's also some high-end talent. I think this is solid. This is the most optimistic I've been going into a spring training in quite some time. I don't mind this roster. There's a lot of, again, kind of volatility. There's some guys that could be really good, maybe struggle a little bit. So we'll see how spring training plays out. But yeah, this will change. I am also notorious for those longtime listeners for getting exactly one of these really wrong. 2 years ago was obviously Badu and Carpenter, which everyone still reminds me of, rightfully so. And then I think last year was that Bo Brisky? Maybe, yeah. I feel like it was, or maybe no, it was the starting rotation one last year, the Reese Olson versus Matt Manning debacle, which obviously was ridiculous as well. So I'm notorious for a massive swing and miss once every spring training when it comes to roster projection. So you can all have fun trying to figure out who that is going to be rather this season. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back tomorrow talking about news and notes from spring, and maybe we'll see when, but this week we will start our player preview series as well. All right. Peace and love going to therapy. Dope. I'll catch y'all tomorrow, baby. Go Tigers.